In the cold, dark waters of the North Atlantic, the catfish is not a hunter of elegance or grace. It's a provocateur. You see, when fishermen once shipped live cod across long distances, they discovered that the cod would arrive pale and lifeless. Its muscles had gone soft, its flavor had dulled. And then somebody had an idea. Put a few catfish in the tank. The catfish harassed the cod relentlessly all the way to market. So when the ship docked, they discovered that the cod were lean, they were taut, and they were full of life. The catfish kept them sharp. Now, the story stuck because it captures a truth about competition. Sometimes the best way to make something stronger is to put a little bit of fear into it. Western market analysts began using the term the catfish effect in the early 2000s to describe a pattern they were seeing in the Chinese economy. The government would deliberately introduce strong foreign competitors to stimulate domestic innovation. Here's what happens. The Chinese state invites powerful foreign companies into its economy. Companies like Google, Facebook, Uber, and Tesla, dangling access to the world's largest pool of consumers. And these firms are the catfish. They're swift, they're confident, and they're innovative. They teach, they build, they show what's possible. But in the process, the domestic cod toughen up. Local firms study the intruder, they learn its secrets, and they adapt. Then, just as the foreign catfish grows comfortable, the current changes. Regulations tighten up, partnerships strain, and access narrows until the outsider is forced back out to sea. And left behind are the sharper, stronger local competitors. This is the Baidu, the WeChat, the Didi, and the BYD, muscular from the chase, ready to dominate their own waters and swim out into the world. The catfish effect in nature and in economics is the art of provoked evolution. You invite the predator in, let it stir the tank, and when it's gone, what remains is not chaos, but a hardier ecosystem built in its wake. 2 months ago, 20 venture capitalists from the United States and Europe flew to China to tour a selection of its advanced technology industries. Now, upon returning, they reported and plan to announce publicly during Climate Week in New York very soon, they have identified at least half a dozen U.S. technology industries they now consider uninvestable. I'm talking about battery manufacturing, solar power generation, and energy storage among them. Now, these venture capitalists weren't saying that the American companies were uninvestable. They were saying the entire industries were. Now, why would they say that? Because from their perspective, the Chinese competitors were already so far ahead that the investors could not justify financing the American equivalents. There was no longer a contest. There was already a clear winner. Now, this is sobering, especially when you consider that the value of the U.S. stock market has been carried by its technology dominance for the past 30 years. The S&P 500, representing the 500 largest publicly traded U.S. companies, has a cumulative value of around $57 trillion. Yet, $23 trillion, that's 40% of that value, comes from only 10 firms, 9 of which are technology companies, Berkshire Hathaway being the lone exception. So how did China build this edge in advanced technology? Let's start with electric vehicles. China's domestic EV and autonomous driving champions have executed a deliberate, multi-stage version of the catfish strategy, luring the world leaders into its waters, learning from them, and then overtaking them. Tesla, perhaps more than any other, exemplifies this pattern. So let's look at Tesla in China. Here's a timeline. In 2014, Tesla officially launched sales in China, delivering its first Model S cars. Now, early sales were modest because the cars had to be imported from the United States and they were very expensive. But in 2018, China relaxed its joint venture rules, allowing Tesla to become the first foreign automaker to wholly own a factory in China, the Gigafactory Shanghai. And by 2020, the Model 3 had become the best-selling EV in China, marking Tesla's breakout moment. But in 2021, the current began to change. Chinese authorities began to leverage subsidies, data localization laws, and full self-driving restrictions to tilt the field in favor of domestic brands. And by 2023 to 2025, Tesla's share of China's EV market had fallen down to 4 to 5%, while BYD, the local fish, has consolidated over 30% of the market. This is the catfish effect in motion. You invite the foreign innovator in, you offer incentives, you require data sharing and local integration, then gradually shift regulation to favor domestic champions once the knowledge transfer is complete. Let's look at this as a broader pattern, because Tesla is far from the first example. The same playbook has been used across industries time and time again. Google launched in China with a censored version of its search engine in 2006. Now, Google quickly captured about 1/3 of China's search market. That's a huge market, earning strong traction among educated, tech-savvy users who valued its cleaner interface and global search results. In 2008, state agencies began to promote Baidu as the safe, patriotic alternative, and Baidu's market share rose to 60%, while Google's fell to 30%. And by 2010, Google exited mainland China, redirecting its Google.cn traffic to Hong Kong. In 2007, Facebook launched in China and gained early popularity among China's urban youth and university students, becoming a niche social media network for globally minded users. But by 2009, the CCP encouraged citizens and businesses to adopt WeChat and Weibo for communication and payments. Facebook access was blocked that same year, and by 2009, Facebook exited China, never to return. In 2014, Uber launched in China and quickly captured 30 to 40% of market share in key urban centers through aggressive driver subsidies and partnerships with Baidu for mapping and payments. By 2015, state-linked investors bankrolled a local firm, Didi, and its merger with Kuaidi, creating a national ride-hailing monopoly. And by 2016, Uber had exited China, selling its operations to Didi for a 17% stake. The same thing happened with LinkedIn. In 2014, LinkedIn launched its operations as a localized Chinese platform. 1 year later, by 2015, LinkedIn surpassed 20 million users by partnering with state-owned firms and positioning itself as the trusted global network for Chinese professionals. But a year later, the CCP restricted LinkedIn's visibility, while the local firm, Meimei, expanded freely. And by 2018, Meimei surpassed LinkedIn as China's dominant professional network. By 2021, LinkedIn exited China. Amazon took a crack at China in 2005. They entered China via the acquisition of a local company called Joyo.com. And they had a lot of early success. But by 2011 through 2013, new customs inspection and data storage rules constrained foreign e-commerce firms, and China's cross-border zones granted Alibaba preferential tax treatment. By 2015, state media campaigns began urging consumers to buy Chinese and use Chinese platforms, boosting Alibaba's user base. 2019, Amazon exited China, closing its domestic marketplace, but retaining Amazon Web Services. Now, this is a strategy. It's not an accident. What looks like a coincidence is, in fact, a design. China's economic planners have built a system that uses foreign innovators as catalysts, importing technology, competition, and expertise, and then converting them into a domestic advantage. The state opens the door just wide enough for the learning to occur, and then quietly closes it once the local players have mastered the game. And the result is a generation of Chinese champions from Baidu, WeChat, Didi, BYD, Alibaba, each forged in the friction of foreign competition. The catfish were invited in to stir the tank. The cod that survived now rule the sea. Now, critics will argue that these companies are merely a consequence of Chinese state capitalism and that government intervention and state control have propped up their value. And look, I don't dispute that. However, state capitalism has now arrived in the United States, and it's about to heat up in a major way. So it's probably a good time to understand it well. Now look, none of this takes away from the skill or the innovation of Chinese entrepreneurs. If anything, it shows how effectively state coordination and private competition worked together. And that's not propaganda, that's strategy. And quite frankly, it worked incredibly well. The Chinese economy is one of the most misunderstood subjects in the West, so I spend a disproportionate amount of my time studying it. At the end of 2025, China will announce its 15th five-year plan. These five-year planning sessions began in 1949, right after the revolution. And if you track the priorities of each five-year plan back to 1949, it'll give you a play-by-play of how China has moved from what was a poverty-stricken nation of rice farmers to the most competitive economy in the world. What used to focus on coal and grain production quotas, effectively, we need to find a way to feed our people and heat their homes, has evolved into dominating the world's energy and advanced technology sectors. And from my perspective, it's working. Let me know what you think in the comments. I cover this stuff every week. If you enjoy my content, give me a subscribe and hit that like button. I will see you next week.